As I'm sure many of you have already seen, considering it almost has 1 million views, a couple months ago I made a video talking about why nobody plays the Egyptian god cards. And in that video I was specifically talking about why nobody that plays the game competitively or even halfway competitively would bother playing with these sort of quote-unquote all-powerful cards that are so iconic and that a lot of people sort of have confused the effects on. In today's video we're going to break down the effects once again real fast, and then we're going to talk about 5 easy counters that you can actually use to beat these, because one of the things that I noticed from the comments is that there are actually still people out there that play in a really casual setting and can't figure out a way to beat their friends when their friends summon these cards. And today's video is going to kind of focus on 5 ways that you can beat these cards in pretty much any deck. I'm going to make them as generic as possible. Before we start talking about the counters to these cards, I want to quickly go over the actual protection effect that these god cards have. So all 3 of them share the same 2 protection effects, and then Obelisk has 1 bonus protection effect. The 2 that all 3 of them share is as follows. So the first effect prevents their normal summon from being negated. That means you can't use a card like Solemn Warning or Solemn Judgment to negate these guys' summon. That's pretty good. And then the second effect says when normal summon, cards and effects cannot be activated. Now that line seems to confuse a lot of old school players, so let me just explain what that means. It means that when this thing is normal summon, nobody can activate cards or effects. Now that's only in response to the normal summon. It's not for the rest of the turn, it's not for the rest of the game, it's only in response to the normal summon. So that means that it counters cards like Torrential Tribute or Bottomless Trap Hole, but it doesn't stop your opponent from using something on their next turn. It doesn't even stop your opponent from doing anything on your turn after this thing is normal summon. It just means that these cards, their summon is going to stick. That's basically what those protection effects say. And then Obelisk has this bonus effect that says it can't be targeted by spells, traps, or card effects. Now that also seemed to confuse a lot of people, but let me just clear this up. This is really easy actually ever since 2011, because since 2011, every time Konami has printed a card that targets or reprinted a card that targets, they put the word target in the text. There's not been a single card printed since 2011 that doesn't use the word target that targets. Every single card that says target on it targets cards, which means we don't have to guess which cards affect Obelisk. We don't have to guess if Darkhold targets. We don't have to guess if Raigeki targets. Both those cards have been reprinted after 2011, and neither of them actually target things, which means that they're really good outs to Obelisk. Now I do want to say real quick that one of the best counters to the god cards is actually kind of funny, because one of the best counters against the god cards, and also one of my main arguments against these cards in a competitive sense, is that the best counter to these cards is simply preventing your opponent from summoning them in the first place. Very often your opponent will not be able to get these out on the first board, and even a lot of people might argue you're not supposed to bring them out on the first board, because with cards like Winged Dragon of Ra and Slifer, you're really trying to do a ton of damage, not so much actually control the board. So what that means is that you usually don't have to worry about these cards coming out on the first turn, which means that as long as you set up a board that can deal with your opponent's cards without actually having to deal with the god cards themselves, you usually can just defeat them before they get a chance to summon these in the first place. Now I'm going to talk about cards in the rest of this video that actually deal with them when they do hit the board, but just as a general message, if you're really struggling against your friend that's playing god cards in a deck, just try to build your deck with more reactive cards so you can actually stop them before they get a chance to bring these cards out, because especially in those casual settings, these cards simply do not come out very fast. They come out after your opponent's amassed a pretty large board, so just try to play cards in general that sort of deal with their monsters before they get a chance to summon the god cards. Anyway, let's jump right into the list at number 5, and this is something that I've already kind of mentioned, because I mentioned that the non-targeting effects work really well on Obelisk, and that's going to be the number 5 way to deal with these cards, and actually one of the most common ways to deal with them. So I'm going to list some cards that you guys have probably all heard of before, even if you haven't played in a lot of years, and these cards all work against Obelisk and by extension Slifer and Ra, because as I already explained, Slifer and Ra basically have no protection once they actually hit the board, whereas Obelisk is the one that you actually have to deal with. Anyway though, cards like Mirror Force, Dark Hole, and Raigeki do not target, which means all three of those cards, which are extremely common, especially in old school dueling, all three of them can deal with Obelisk and obviously Slifer and Ra. So if you're playing any of those cards, you can very easily deal with any of the God cards. I think that makes it really, really easy. Now, the number 4 way that you can deal with these cards, another thing that's pretty common, is any sort of attack boosting effect. Now, I'd say that one of the best ways to go is using Honest, a card that boosts the attack of light monsters. That pretty much ensures that any light monster that you have can run over any of the God cards. Now, in Slifer's case, you'll have to summon something with more than 2,000 attacks so that it doesn't blow up when Slifer uses its effect. But other than that, against Ra and Obelisk, you can simply summon any light monster, even one with just 200 attack, and then run into them and activate Honest, because these cards don't have any special effects that prevent you from using cards when they battle or anything along those lines, which means cards like Honest actually take care of them pretty effectively. Now, I don't even really need to mention it, but really any deck that has attack boosting effects can sort of deal with these cards, especially in the case of Ra and Slifer, where they're not really having any protection effects, so you might not even have to use an attack increasing effect if you really want to deal with these cards, simply because you can just use the regular removal that your deck already has going for it. It's really just Obelisk that you have to worry about. Anyway, moving on to number 3, we're going to talk about a very, very specific card that can be used to out all 3 of these cards. Well, mainly, I guess not in the case of Ra, because Ra sometimes has a lot of attack points, but in terms of Slifer and Obelisk, one of the best, most commonly run cards in all extra decks is number S39, Utopia the Lightning. Now, if you don't know what this card does, basically you can summon it on top of number 39, Utopia, which only takes 2 level 4 monsters to make, which means as long as you are playing level 4 monsters, well, at least 2 of them, you can summon Utopia, go into S39, Utopia the Lightning, and when Utopia the Lightning attacks, it boosts itself to 5,000 attack, which in most cases will be able to take out Slifer, and in all cases will be able to take out Obelisk. Now, that is an extremely common extra deck card to run. Pretty much every deck playing level 4s is going to run Utopia and Utopia the Lightning. The card isn't very expensive, it's not hard to come by, and I think that that is one of the most common outs to these cards. I mean, it's kind of fallen out of favor in the competitive landscape, but the competitive players are playing the number 1 card that I'm going to talk about. But in general, even if you're playing it in a casual setting, a card like Utopia the Lightning can be extremely effective for dealing with these cards, and I'd say in general, Obelisk and Slifer are the more popular of the 3 God cards compared to Ra, which means that you have a better chance of actually facing those cards. And if your opponent is summoning Ra through the Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere mode, it actually only has 4,000 attack, which means the Lightning will take it out there as well. But maybe you don't play level 4 monsters. Maybe you're playing a deck with a lot of lower level monsters or higher level monsters. What do you use to take out these cards? Maybe you don't draw your board wipes. What's an extra deck option that you can play to out the God cards? Well, one of the best options, and this actually will work against all 3 of them, is Borreload Dragon. Now, this is a Link monster, which Links are like the new rage right now if you haven't played the game in a while, but Borreload Dragon will out all of these cards, because Borreload Dragon not only outs the card, but actually steals it. It's sort of like a change of heart effect, except Borreload Dragon does not target, so it will get around Obelisk's protection as well, and then you're stealing the card, so you actually can hit your opponent with the God card that they have spent so long trying to summon, and I think that's hilarious. I think that's perfect, because not only are you getting rid of the card, but you're actually using it for your own strategy, which I think is awesome. So Borreload Dragon is a pretty commonly played card. You can summon it just by activating the card Scapegoat during your opponent's end phase, making a couple Link monsters on your turn, and then using those Link monsters to make Borreload. So if you're playing any deck that plays monsters that aren't level 4, you can play Borreload Dragon to sort of bridge that gap and play a card that you can actually steal their God cards with and then hit them directly. That's even more hilarious if they summon Ra, so they're down to 100 life points, and you summon Borreload, steal their Ra, and take out their last 100. That's a great effect that you can use, and Borreload Dragon is super easy to play in pretty much any deck that's not only playing a lot of different level monsters, but also any deck that can fit in Scapegoat. Now, at the number 1, we're going to talk about probably the most competitive card on this list, or the competitive set of cards, and that is the kaiju monsters. Now, I've already made a couple videos about kaijus, but basically what they do is they're high-level monsters that let you tribute opponents' monsters to summon them from your hand. Now, this is really important because, just like I said earlier, if you read these cards, they don't say target on their effect, which means that tributing your opponent's obelisk doesn't require you targeting the card beforehand. This is also an inherent summon, which means that even if your opponent manages to negate the summon of the kaiju monster, you're still tributing their monster to summon it in the first place. Now, this is huge because you can give your opponent a card like Gameciel, which only has 2200 attack, and yeah, it does have an extra effect dealing with counters, but in general, people just use these as gigantic normal monsters that they give their opponent to get rid of whatever crazy monsters they have on board. In the case of the god cards, you contribute a huge monster like Obelisk at 4000 attack that can't be targeted, and just give them a 2200 turtle that you can run over with ease. And that's really important. And also, the kaijus are all rares. They're super easy to come by. They came in like every single pack for a whole year. They printed like 4 of them in each pack, so they're really easy to actually obtain. You can find them for just a couple bucks online, and they'll pretty much out every single god card with no problem at all. And while the kaijus themselves maybe are the best option to deal with these cards, I still want to say, just to conclude this video, the best counter to the god cards is simply abusing their inherent inconsistency. Even in the best of decks, I see a lot of people that don't realize that the pendulum rules have changed, and they're talking about how you can just blow a bunch of pendulum cards and summon 5 from your extra deck and then summon a god card. Just so you guys know that the pendulum rules have actually changed. You can't quite do that as easily anymore. But even if you could do that as easily, outside of those very specific scenarios, the god cards just aren't easy to summon, and then when you get them on the board, they can be outed by all the cards and more than I listed in this video. So just in general, if you're playing in casual duels and you're wondering how to beat the god cards, hopefully this helped you out a lot, but I still just wanted to say that the best way to deal with these cards is simply kill your opponent before they actually manage to get them on the board. Anyway though, if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to post them in the comment section below. Hopefully this helped you, and I will see you guys later. Goodbye.